Well, everyone, we've just crossed the top of the hour, so let's get going with today's webinar. I greatly appreciate everyone joining us today from around the world, so thank you all for taking the time out on your Tuesday morning, evening, and afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Corey Hartland, Director of Client Engagement Solutioning here at Procedure Flow, and I am going to be joined by Rachel Mills for today's webinar on award-winning strategies for building differentiated, seamless employee experiences. Please feel free to reach out. Follow us at Procedure Flow on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Remember to follow, like, share, engage. We'd love to hear from you and get your feedback. But without further ado, please, I'm going to hand it over. Rachel, please introduce yourself.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel Mills. I'm excited to be here with you today. I've been in the care industry for well over 20 years now. I'm just really passionate about helping people, whether those are our customers or the employees. Feel really strongly that you can't have one without the other, so taking care of our employees is key, which is why we wanted to do this talk today.
And we couldn't be happier to have you, Rachel, and greatly appreciate your time. You know what? I'm going to just hand it over to you. I'm going to play the role of hype man here today and just sort of chime in with the odd question. And for those of you joining a Zoom webinar for the first time, if you do see the taskbar on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you do see a Q&A section. So feel free to post your questions and we'll make sure we answer them either in real time or we might even wait till the end of the webinar and do more questions at that time. So without further ado, Rachel, I'm going to hand things over to you and kindly step out of your way.
Thank you, Corey. So I'll start by going through some items that I'd like to cover today. We've done the welcome and introduction already. We'll talk about the state of your contact center, a few reflective questions, selecting the best person for the role, ideal training approach, providing support for new employees, how to keep employees engaged, and then putting all of this together to really achieve a differentiated, seamless employee experience. And then we'll have an opportunity for some Q&A. Is your contact center facing financial pressures? Are you confident about the quality of service delivered to clients? Is anyone concerned about productivity? Generally, the answer to either all of these questions or even one or two of them is yes. Managing contact centers, care centers is not an easy task. We've all heard the expression time is money, and for all of us, productivity is money. We live in a competitive world, and a lot of our clients, they really want the best product at the most competitive price. They want the most value for their money. Most of us have these concerns, and if you don't, well, really good for you. Let's hope that you can still learn or reflect on a few things today. And really, it's how can an organization, or more specifically a contact center, achieve all of this? I believe it's through the employees. And some key measurements, some KPIs that a lot of us measure in the care industry. Average handle time. It could be calls per hour, cost per call. A common one nowadays is first call resolution. Some still measure CSATs. So it's really which KPI is the most important to you, and there might be 1, 2, or 3, and how can you positively impact that? Selecting the best person for the role is where it starts, really. Have you ever tried to engage an employee who's in a job that they don't like, that they don't feel like coming into work every day? In the care industry, turnover is a reality. I've witnessed ongoing CSR postings to replace turnover or manage growth. This is a great opportunity to hire the right person. So focusing on what is it that we're looking for. And a lot of times people jump to the interview piece, but taking a moment to review the job posting and make sure that is still accurate, it reflects the position that you're looking for, the skills that you need, is very, very important. Going through the pre-screen process, there's some skip this step as well and they go straight to the interview. And you'll notice on the slide that the interview is further down the bottom. Pre-screens can really save some time for you in the long run. So it may take more time at the beginning, but if you can test how are their phone skills when you're calling for that pre-screen call. Is their voice pleasant? Are they professional when they answer the phone? There's a lot of things that you can tune into and make sure that they're the right candidate. Testing. A lot of people do not bother with testing. They worry about, what am I going to test for? They may not have any testing developed in-house. Sometimes they go externally for testing. What would you be testing for is the question. Do they need really strong computer skills, keyboarding skills? Do they need more resilience training? It's really important to understand what is the profile that you're looking for, and how can you validate that the person has a good foundation to do the position that you're hiring them for. Profiling, in the past, we've used predictive index, which has been really good. If you have someone who needs a lot of detail and you're in an environment where maybe you have less detail available, your training is not as structured, the person may really struggle with that onboarding. And it's important to recognize that. Also, if you have someone who's more of an extrovert, and that could bring some good dynamics in your team meetings or even on the phone with the client. But if the entire team is a team of extroverts, what kind of dynamics will you have then? If you have a personality type that is less dominant and your clients calling in are more dominant, what could happen? Now the customer is taking control of the call, and your employees are really, their average handle time is extremely high now. They're really struggling with trying to regain control of that call. It's more challenging to satisfy first call resolution. Those are all factors that, when you're looking to fill the role, it's really, really important. The interview piece, I've seen a lot of young leaders in the care industry. A lot of times we promote from within, which is wonderful. It provides great opportunities for our frontline employees. What kind of training have those junior leaders received to interview and select the right people? Have they had any support at all, any formal training? What we've done in some of my past experiences, if we had newer team leaders, we would team them up with a more experienced leader, or we've even seen ourselves do a second round of interviews. So the more junior leaders would do the first interviews, and then a manager would come in afterwards and look at the selection. It would be like a screening process. There's really different ways to set it up. And this is really just to give you a high-level overview. It's not to provide all of the solutions. It's not a cookie-cutter approach. It's really looking at what's important in your contact center and what's working well, what is not working well, and considering opportunities of what could be done differently. Obviously, that selection process is key. We've used something like predictive indexes before to tie it all together to say, okay, what we've seen in the interview, is that the same as what we're seeing in their profile? And really making sure that, why does the person want to work with us? Is it someone who's going to have opportunities for progression, or is it someone who we're at risk of losing in 1 to 2 years? If you have someone who loves challenges and they take a role that's really simple and repetitive, that person could be bored very quickly and lose interest in that position. And then you're back to the drawing board again, trying to find a replacement.
And Rachel, I know interview questions must always be sort of a lot of the crux when it comes down to actually, you do your profile, your testing, your screening, and then you finally get to the interview. What have been some strategies that you've seen successful, and some of those questions that really help you match, the person for the role, that even maybe helps in the selection process?
Well, Corey, we look a lot at the past experience the employees had, where they've worked, what kind of roles they've done, and really diving into, why do you want to work for our company, and why do you want to work in this role? A lot of times it's reality. People are looking for employment. They have obligations. They need to work. And sometimes they'll apply for a lot of roles, not knowing what they're getting themselves into. So I find that those two basic things will uncover a lot, because if they've jumped around position to position, which is more and more common with our younger generations because they have options and opportunities. So being mindful of what are they looking for, what is motivating them, and what do they really want to do. And if you can dive into that and the person hopefully can be open and honest, then you get a better insight into, is this a good match?
That's great.
After you've spent time in the recruitment cycle and you've found your perfect candidate, and that, I can't stress that enough, like trying to find your ideal candidate takes a lot of work and effort. And that's why it's the first slide on here, because that's the start of it all. How do we adapt our training? Have we considered all the different learning styles? I still see companies, and I've been there as well, where we'll have a teacher in the front of the class who'll be doing reading all day long. And we know that some people may learn through that, but most of us need more than just that format. Adapting the training to make sure that you're meeting the needs of every learner in the classroom is critical. Another really good question is, what is the optimum size class, or class size, I should say? Is it 5 learners? Is it 2? Is it 10? And sometimes when we get ourselves in a situation where we have a lot of roles to fill, it's difficult. We might see that we have a large class and not everyone will be able to learn at the same pace. Some learn through seeing or observing. I've seen training programs where employees will sit side by side, and through that, they'll learn from the other person. A lot of people learn through doing, and that's probably the most impactful one for most people I've worked with. If your training room is not set up the same as the employee's workstation afterwards, do we have an expectation that it will be a smooth transition? For example, a training room that's set up with a computer and no phone, but the employee goes to their desk and they have dual monitors and now they have a phone. How have we prepared them to make sure that they're successful? As simple as it may sound, I've seen employees get on what we call the floor, they take their first call and they're not sure how to put the phone on, the caller on hold, or they're not sure how to transfer a call. That's really, really challenging for those employees, and it certainly puts a great deal of stress on them. So adapting the learning style to the group that you have is critical, and doing some testing to see along the way, how are they learning? How are they doing? I've also seen instances where the employees don't even finish their training because of the stress levels. So this is where we can really make a difference. It's part of the onboarding package. There's a study that was done with a public school, or I should say a survey, and they asked the students, tell us about your learning experience. How did that work for you? And some of their key words in their description was that it was hands-on. They could connect. They could go at their own pace. They built on experiences, explored creativities and passion. They did watch the teacher teach, but they also learned from peers and teachers, and they had support. So there's a lot to consider when we talk about training, but the blended learning styles has been what I've seen be most successful. So you have some variety. It's not as monotone, and sometimes you have employees that you'll hire that need to be challenged and they want some variety. So if you only have a teacher in front of the room, that can make it really, really challenging for them. After you've finished the training, do you do any post surveys to understand what works and what doesn't work? If you do, what method do you use? I've seen an evolution over the years of not doing any surveys to doing paper surveys to now using tools like SurveyMonkey, for example. And the biggest question if you're doing a survey is, when is the right time to seek this feedback? I've seen instances where it's right after training. It could be a month later, could be 3 months later. What I've seen from my own experience is when you do it immediately after the training is complete, a lot of times those new employees don't know what they don't know. They don't have the experience of being on the phones yet. If you wait 6 months later, sometimes that's too long and they don't really remember how things went in training. So what we've recommended, what we've used in the past was to spread it out. So you might do a post-survey a month later and another one 3 months later. So the employee has a bit more experience and they can really provide you with some insights as to what works and what doesn't.
And I would imagine, sorry to interrupt, Rachel, I would imagine the kinds of questions you ask would also greatly impact that. So I could easily see the value in getting a survey right after class, maybe on the presenter themselves or the learning experience, but maybe not exactly how that knowledge applies to their job. Hey, you wait for that, a month, 3 months down the line when they've had a chance to be in the role.
Absolutely, Corey, you're right. What do you want to learn from this? And sometimes for new employees, it takes a lot of courage to speak up about something that they feel is not right. And for leadership, who has time to sit in the training class to really assess the trainer and see how they're doing and what they could be doing differently? So the key here is, what do you want to know? And how do you intend to use the findings? You could do a survey in the middle of training if you wanted to understand, what's the room setup like? Is that working? Is that optimized? Is the room too cold or too hot? Do you not take enough frequent breaks? So that's more of the logistical piece. And then the learning piece is definitely after the fact. So on the slide here, you'll see some key questions that I like to ask myself, and I've seen other leaders ask as well. What is it that we want to know? And how do we want to use these findings? And creating an environment of openness with our employees as soon as they come to our company is so important, because that's going to be part of the culture that we create, and it's going to impact their engagement down the road. If they see that we're open and we want to know and that we're going to take action on the feedback as much as possible, then they'll be more apt to bring suggestions. If it's closed off or if we're defensive, then they're not going to be interested and they won't participate.
Great point.
Every contact center does have a different structure. I've worked in structures where you might have a CSR, a team leader, supervisor, manager. Most areas will have a training department. You may have some quality assurance employees. And what I've seen lacking in some of the contact centers that I've visited or worked with, second tier support. So you have this new employee that is excited, just successfully finished their training, and they're on the floor and they're by themselves. How do you think they're feeling? That's extremely challenging. They're concerned about making mistakes. They're not sure who to go ask questions to. So the support after the fact is critical. Sometimes you can use a tenured CSR, tenured agent, to serve as a buddy system. We've seen team leaders walk the floor. Instead of trying to free up too many people, you could have one person floor walk and try to offer some support. We had a lot of success in the past implementing a second tier support. So those were employees that had a lot of experience. They understood the business. They had connections to other departments. And they would take calls from our frontline employees to answer questions and take escalated calls if anything escalated, if there was a need for it. And basically, that support was there for them throughout their schedule. And that makes a big difference for them, because we've heard a lot of positive feedback about not feeling alone, and there's someone there to help them when they get stuck or if they're not sure where to find an answer. Another piece to support is team meetings. Do you have team meetings with your groups? How often do those happen? I've seen instances where we would cancel meetings for months at a time because it was so busy. And then the employees are really missing that interaction with their peers and the sharing that takes place, sharing of information or experiences. So trying to find better ways to not have to sacrifice those meetings is key for the employee engagement and trying to retain them. Again, we're talking about the employee experience and making sure that it's a positive one, that it's a world-class one. So what's our approach to closing the loop on the quality assurance training and coaching? So obviously, we talked about trying to find the right person for the role, training them, the support after the fact. If we continue on that support, having some quality assurances somehow is important. The employees want to know, how am I doing? Am I meeting the expectations? Am I going to succeed at this role? And they need positive reinforcement as well. So in each company, the structure may look different, like I said earlier, but it's really looking at the process and saying, okay, do we have that holistic view? Is there a partnership happening? Because oftentimes you may have the contact center under one umbrella, and you may have the quality assurance and training team under a different umbrella, under reporting to a different manager or director. So making sure that there's alignment and that we're working towards one common goal is important. I've seen some do this very successfully, whether it was under one umbrella or not. If everyone's clear on what are the goals and what are we striving for, making sure that we set the priorities. Up to now, the focus has been on new employee experiences. It's important to continue on our path of diversified, seamless employee experience by touching on engagement. And that's it. I know it's a new buzzword, that whole engagement piece, but it is key because that's what makes a difference for the employees. If they're fully engaged, they're going to give you their very best. If they're not engaged, then it's hard to expect the best. You probably won't get that. So if we start with again, people, they're at the foundation here. They care if you care. And when you're having conversations with them, are we most often listening to respond, or do we listen to try to understand what they're telling us? And I find that if you can't put yourself in the other person's shoes, it makes it that much harder to relate. So trying to make sure that you see it from their lens, from their perspective. I've seen success with just job shadowing, sitting by their side, trying to understand their perspective. Recognizing their efforts. When times are hard, they need encouragement. And when times are good, sometimes, taking a few minutes to celebrate the successes can make a world of a difference for people. Exploring their ideas. Not everyone will want to be active in this role, but there are people that have thoughts on how we should do things, and they have opinions. And sometimes they may not have all of the answers, but tapping into their ideas will make them feel even more important. And that's where they're going to feel the value. As far as processes, I've worked in multiple different companies. Sometimes the processes were very simple and clear. Other times it was extremely complex. Managing information is not an easy task. If you are managing multiple contact centers, trying to have alignment amongst those contact centers is also a challenge. The key here is, how do we make it easier for employees? And I've seen success with actually procedure flow, which is why we've decided to partner on this webinar. Trying to get to one central source of information is generally a lot of companies' goal. Not always easy to do. A lot of companies have multiple systems for different things, but how do we bring it all together? Most contact centers have some sort of call flow, and if you don't, chances are you have one and you just don't know. But you get the call, you have the opening part, then you have what I call the discovery part. Why are you calling me today? What can I help you with? And then you'll have the solutions or the response part. So you were looking for an answer, here's the answer. You have a problem, here's the solution. And then you close the call. So usually it's, similar process, doesn't matter which company you work with or what service you're offering or what product you're offering, there's a call flow. And for our employees, if you don't have a good information management system, how do you ensure that it's a consistent experience for your clients? How do you make sure it's a consistent experience for the employees? Because again, they want to succeed. And if you have certain expectations of them covering different material in the call, how do they do that? Do they have to create their own checklist to do that? Are they having to go into 3, 4, 5 different systems to figure that out? So having that one central source is key. And in our case, Procedure Flow was exactly that. We were able to link it, link URLs, other systems, and it just made it easy. It was one central point. The employees knew that, oh, if I'm stuck on a process, I can go. And if it's something I don't use often and I want to save, I can put that in my favorites. We also saw that our tenured employees initially felt like, I don't really need this. And what happened over time is those new employees would talk about it so positively that our tenured employees started getting curious about it and started looking it up more. And as you have changes in your companies or changes in your business, this made it easier for the employees to go review those changes and basically stay up to date. Because I've seen companies where it's an email after another email after another email, and the employees cannot manage their inbox while taking calls. And speaking of taking calls, if you had to read 2 pages of material to figure out a procedure while you're on the phone, usually most of us struggle with that. When I consider the literacy rate in a lot of our countries, it's not that high. And the newer generations, there's more and more children that are diagnosed with learning disabilities. So how will our next generations work with us if what we have are full 2-inch binders that we've now put electronically, and they're trying to search through that and there's no real order to it. So this is where all of this is so important for the employees, because this is their day-to-day. So trying to keep our employees engaged when their life is too difficult, it's really difficult. It's not engaging for them. They want to make sure that they do a good job. I've not met one person yet that wakes up in the morning and says, let me not do a good job today. Let me mess this up. Most people really want to succeed. They want to do well. They want to do a good job. So enabling them to do that, allowing for them to be able to do that, we have to have a right foundation for them to support.
That's right. And it sounds like that right foundation is just a better knowledge experience, right?
Absolutely.
Making sure they can find the right information at the right time. And if they can do that, the customer wins.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
So when we talk about putting it all together, you know, when we consider it, most things depreciate in value. For example, our buildings, our vehicles, our equipment. The one thing that we can count on that if we invest in it is going to appreciate, it's people. So the question is, do we take the time to recognize that and recognize them? Do we tell them that they matter and that they make a difference? Anytime you have an opportunity to involve employees and invest in their development, I would encourage you to do so. So it starts with the recruitment. Like I said earlier, taking the time to find the right person. Are we putting people first? Are we demonstrating compassionate leadership? Providing feedback and positive construction is important, but having compassion for our employees is going to make a world of a difference. If we can include them in the process improvement, they'll appreciate that. And you may not have everyone jumping up and down at first because if it's new to them, but if over in time, if they get used to it and you continue on that path of including them, they're going to feel like they're a part of that team.
And it really does make sure that the communication is transparent and open.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's really, you know, this is it's a higher level because we've covered a lot of ground in just, 20, 30 minutes almost. But it's like a recipe. If anyone likes to cook, your goal is to perfect the recipe. So you might start and you might Google something, and there might be an ingredient in there that you don't like that's overpowering, or you might feel like it's missing something. And the more that you modify the recipe and you tweak it and you make it your own, then next thing you know, you found, a world-class recipe for something. Well, I consider work the same. If recruitment's going really, really well and training is what's not going as good as it could, then focus on training and look to improve that. If it's the information management and the support material for the employees, if that's a struggle for them, then how do we improve that piece? So it's not realistic to work on everything all at once, but it's really identifying what are your strengths and what is it that we could do better and how do we want to approach that. So yeah, again, it's, there's some steps, and it's really figuring out what is the biggest strength that you have, what is it that you want to improve on, and how will you do that. And really, when we look at, if you could have all of this in harmony, then you're in that sweet spot. And every day we have an opportunity to learn through our failures, our successes, and we learn through people, through others. We discover new things, and even old ones. But with the right attitude, we can all improve. That's from the team leader, manager, supervisor, or the employee. And people really do want to be great. And I see it as our job to help them achieve that.
And I love your line of "if you care, they care." I think that really does sort of encompass everything that you spoke about today. And when I think about sort of, please, everybody on the call today, please, if you have any questions, feel free to start firing them off to Rachel. We'd love to get them answered for you. And I love that line of "if you care, they care." Right, because it really does show that whole lead by example. And in the call center space, I've talked to many in the industry who say, what, we hire the person we train for the role.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So we're going to move on to Q&A, guys. Rachel, thanks so much for your time. We greatly appreciate you putting this presentation together. And I know Glasgow has a question. I'm wondering if we are recording and you'll be able to have access to the presentation. And yes, you will. We are recording this session. What we'll be doing tomorrow is sort of doing a summary blog post on today's webinar and sending everybody a link to the recording and the blog post. So yes, you will get a copy to share with your team. And if anybody has any other questions, feel free to reach out. We'd love to get them answered for you. And of course, Rachel, we already had some questions queued up for you. I know you talked a little bit earlier about KPIs or measures that you really want to focus on first. Could you talk a little bit sort of maybe how those KPIs have sort of changed over the years?
Absolutely. I've been in the industry since 1995, I think, dating myself here, but back then we focused on calls per hour, and over time that evolved to an average handle time. And why that felt like it was a better measure is you can't always control the volume coming in. So trying to measure employee A compared to employee B to employee C, and they're working different schedules, and it's just not a fair measurement for them. So we had moved to an average handle time. What I've seen over the years as well is considering hold time, because we've seen behaviors sometimes that weren't the most desired behaviors of employees putting the client on hold while they go search for stuff, do other things. And I'm pretty critical when it comes to customer service as a consumer myself. And if I'm on hold for 10 minutes and I don't know what's going on, it's not a good experience. So that's definitely an important one. I don't know any contact center that hasn't measured cost per call. So that's usually top of the line. And first call resolution is something that I've seen more and more prevalent. And to me, that makes sense, because as a consumer, who wants to have to call more than once on the same topic?
That's right. And I would imagine even the definition of first call resolution has changed. So if you're seeing a rise in the number of calls, but yet you're seeing an increase in your first call resolutions, then it might mean that you're not quite getting that call resolved on the first call.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could add, Corey, like we implemented procedure flow in one of my previous positions. And when we first started with the project, I made some assumptions that it would help reduce average handle time. And I was proven wrong after a 10-week pilot and a group of newer employees and some that had been here for a little bit longer. That wasn't the case. The average handle time didn't change. But when we started digging in deeper and exploring more, we realized that we had a group of employees that seemed to have extremely high average handle time compared to others. And those were the employees that lacked confidence and would call our second tier support for help very frequently, more than the norm. And then we had other employees that they seemed to have a very low average handle time that was almost questionable. And when we started listening to some of their calls, it was almost like they were cutting corners. So they weren't doing from A to Z on the call, for example. So what we realized was after we finished the pilot and they used procedure flow for some time, that average handle time normalized. So those that were higher came down and those that were lower came up. So it was a good news story because then it led us to ask more questions such as first call resolution. We were self-assessing how many calls were fully resolved versus those that would have required another call. And that score improved as well. And finally, the last piece that really sold us on this approach was the employees were calling the second tier support less after they had procedure flow as a reference tool.
That's right. So it's not just about one KPI, it's taking a look at really all of them, especially if you think about average handle time in relation to decreasing calls to tier 2 support or an agent assist line, and then also coming back to CSAT scores. If average handle times is the same, but CSAT scores are going up, hey, that's a win-win in everybody's book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Any other questions? Well, I know I have a question to ask. So I know when we think about getting not only people engaged, but I could understand that there's a bit of a resistance sometimes when you're trying to, because at the end of the day, what you've been trying to do is not just change one thing, you're really looking at change management here. And so when you think about your tenured employees, what have some of the strategies been in making sure that even your tenured employees are getting sort of that adoption as well? Did that come back to maybe a reward structure? Did that come back to some sort of hiding Easter eggs in the product and letting them find it? Can you talk a little bit about getting the whole team engaged when it comes to adoption and something like a new technology?
Absolutely. The first thing, most people, I say most, don't really like change because they're comfortable. They're comfortable with how things are going. They know it inside and out. So trying to change something that they know and that's been the reality for, could be 2 years, could be 5 years, could be more, is not an easy task. What I found is if you listen to them and really try to understand what they're saying, a lot of times they're telling you what's wrong with stuff. Every single day, they'll tell you what's not working, what's a problem. So trying to use that later to help them understand why we need to change is helpful because sometimes they can see something is just changing their perspective that they weren't seeing before. What we found in the past was we threw challenges at them, such as try to break it, try to find something wrong with it, try to find a call flow that's not right in your opinion. So it kind of forced them to go into that. In this case, I'm speaking about procedure flow, specifically the reference tool. And they would go in and say, oh yeah, that's how I do it. Or, you know what, I don't do that. And it would spark up a conversation with their leader or their peers to say, do you always close your call this way? Because that's not what I was doing. And then they see, oh, this can serve value. There's information there that I don't know. And then finally, what we did that was really helpful is we involved a lot of our tenured employees in the various projects. And when they're involved, they own part of it, right? So they feel like they're an owner now, and they really want to be able to make a difference, and then they want it to be successful. So it changes the dynamic. Like we've had roles like in this project specifically, have tenured employees help with the mapping of the call flows because there's different call types in our world. Also have them involved in change champions. So they would be included in communication meetings and they would share with their peers. And we would rotate those roles through so they weren't permanent, so that multiple employees could be exposed to that. And it would give us an opportunity to assess them as well and see what their skills are when they're given other opportunities.
It's a great way to cross-train and even find sort of those hidden talent amongst your team.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. I've got a silly question for you.
Yes.
What's your favorite question to ask in an interview? From somebody who's probably done hundreds and hundreds of interviews, what's your go-to question?
My go-to question. I'm going to say my favorite question is, I really want to know why they want to work with us. And that's where I get to see if they've done any homework, what they know about the company, what they know about the role, and then what are they passionate about. And usually if I don't get anything in terms of that ignites, sometimes I'll ask them that exactly, like, what are you passionate about? And see what they say. Of course, if they say, oh, I'm passionate about customer service, then, that's a good check mark for me.
Yes, yeah. I could easily see how that would be a win-win in Rachel's books for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, Rachel, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us. You know what? I wanted any last remaining thoughts before we wrap up our webinar today.
Service is so important. It's a differentiator. It's so competitive in any industry you're in. Most of us, we have competition, and that's the recovery of service or the initial service. Both are so important. So hiring the right people and taking good care of those people to take care of your clients, to me, that's the key.
Agreed. Well, you know what, Rachel, I can't thank you enough for joining us on today's webinar. And those of you who've taken your time on a lovely Tuesday to join us, thank you again. And we'll be following up in the next few days with a link to a blog post summarizing the great information that Rachel was able to share with us today, as well as a recording of today's webinar. So don't worry, you'll have a chance to have a recording if you wish to share it around to some of your leaders and members of your team. Please, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to us. My name is Corey Hartland at procedureflow.com would be my email, and feel free to follow, like, share, engage. Once again, we'd love to hear your feedback on today's webinar. And if you'd like to join us, feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you on one of our next webinars. So everybody, I greatly appreciate your time. Rachel, thank you again for taking some time this afternoon. It's so greatly appreciated from us here at Procedure Flow.
Thank you, Corey, for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. Everybody, have a great Tuesday, and we'll see you in the weeks and days to come. Thanks again. Have a lovely day.
Thanks, everyone.